welcome back to our Daily Read Aloud. I survived the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Yesterday, we got a good start. We know our main character, Oscar, had lived in Minnesota. His dad passed away when he was a kid. He made a promise to his dad that he was going to keep the farm and take care of his mom. And then something happened, and he felt like he had to break his promise. Angie, what happened? Where did they have to move? Why couldn't he take care of the farm?
Because there were just two people and Papa did everything.
So where did they move, though?
Chicago.
Okay, Chicago. So they moved to Chicago. They just got there on the train. And Cadence, what happened?
Someone stole their suitcases.
Yes.
Little girl was trying to distract him, and I guess somebody came and stole the suitcases.
Okay, so Mr. Morrow and his mom had to walk away and go take care of something. And he was to guard the suitcases. A little girl said, "I lost my parents," and he went to help her, but it was all a big trick. So he came back, the suitcases were gone. Hayden?
I feel like it's earless. Yeah, me too. Yeah.
All right, who was earless? Someone remind us. Hudson?
Earless was a bandit, and he was like, he only had one ear.
Okay, and so Oscar's dad had to look for him in Chicago, right? Okay, so we are ready for Chapter 4. All right, now this is 30 minutes after the suitcases were stolen at 9 o'clock p.m., Illinois Central Train Depot. All right, here we go. "Those street kids are vicious," the policeman said. He looked down at Oscar. "Son, you're lucky you didn't get stabbed." Mama, Mr. Morrow, and Oscar stood with the policeman on the spot where their suitcases had been. The cop, Officer Brennan, was an old buddy of Mr. Morrow's. He explained that Oscar had been tricked. That little girl wasn't really lost. She was a crook, part of a band of thieves. "She distracted you so the others could steal the suitcases," Officer Brennan said. "Happens here every day." Officer Brennan and the other 3 cops had already scoured the station, but there was no sign of the girl, or the bags, or those rough boys Oscar had seen. Oscar told the policeman about them too, including the red-headed boy with the strange eyes. "Otis Weber," the cop said, his friendly eyes narrowing. "He's only 14 years old, but he's got the heart of a killer. We hear he works for an older guy. They take helpless orphans and turn them into ruthless criminals." Oscar shuddered. "Will you find our suitcases?" Mama said. "Doubtful, ma'am," he said, giving them all an apologetic smile before he left. Mr. Morrow put his arm around Oscar's shoulders. "I should have warned you," he said. "In a big city like this, there are some bad characters." "What's done is done," Mama said, shaking the worry from her face. "We can all get new clothes. What matters is that we are here together." Mr. Morrow beamed at Mama. Oscar ducked out from under Mr. Morrow's arm. Oscar didn't care about his clothes. All he cared about was Papa's badge, which was gone forever. It was past 11 p.m. when they finally got out of the station and into a cab, a beat-up buggy pulled by a dusty horse. The cab driver flashed a smile filled with black teeth when he saw Mr. Morrow. "Charlie!" he cried. "Welcome back." Was there anyone in Chicago who didn't know Mr. Morrow? "Hello, Joseph," Mr. Morrow said, patting the man on the shoulder. "Take us to the Palmer house, please." Joseph let out a sharp whistle. "Fancy!" "We'll have supper there," Mr. Morrow told Mama and Oscar. "Then we'll head home, Oscar. I think you're going to like the house. My father built it. It's a little far away from things, north of our new park. The best room is my studio. You can look out the windows and see all of Chicago." Oscar managed to nod and bit his tongue. Mr. Morrow's house would never be home. Home was Papa's farm, where the air didn't smell like dead hogs, where the only thieves were the rabbits that stole carrots from the garden. The horse clattered away from the train tracks and warehouses and onto a wide avenue of grand buildings. Oscar tried not to act like he was impressed, but the buildings were taller than any tree he'd ever climbed. "Amazing, isn't it?" Mr. Morrow said, smiling proudly. "When I was born, this city was just a little town on a marsh. Today, Chicago is one of the most important cities in the world." "It's beautiful," Mama said. But suddenly Mama's expression darkened. "Does the sky look odd to you?" she asked, her brow wrinkling with worry. Oscar saw it too, a pale orange glow in the sky. "Must be a fire," Joseph said matter-of-factly. "We're having fires practically every night now. Hasn't rained here in months. The city is bone dry." The word fire sent a flash of fear across Mama's face, and it jolted Oscar too. 3 years ago, a massive forest fire had erupted in the woods north of Castle. It burned thousands of acres of pine and birch trees, and then raced across the prairie toward Castle. Dozens of buildings were burned, including Oscar's barn. The entire town could have been lost. But just as flames were lapping at the edges of Main Street, a big rainstorm blew in and doused the fire. "Don't worry," Mr. Morrow said, giving Mama a reassuring pat. "Chicago has one of the best fire departments in the country. We have close to 200 firemen and a fleet of the best new steam pumpers. That fire will be out before we finish supper." The cab lurched to a stop, and Joseph turned around. "And here we are, folks. Palmer House Hotel, finest in the city." They climbed out of the cab, and a man in a top hat swung open the hotel's huge front door. Oscar peered inside at the glittering lobby. Bright lights twinkled, and piano music filled the air. Oscar lingered outside. He'd never seen such a fancy place, and he was sure he didn't belong in there. Oscar glanced back at the street, tempted to bolt away to the train station. And that's when he saw her. A little girl scurrying down the sidewalk. Even in the flickering gaslight, there was no mistaking that dirty yellow cap and those raggedy braids. "There she is!" Oscar called out. But Mama and Mr. Morrow were already starting across the lobby, and Oscar's shouts were drowned out by the music and the hum of the chattering crowd. The girl moved quickly across the sidewalk, and before he even realized what he was doing, Oscar had dashed into the street. He had to catch that little thief. Chapter 5. 10:15 p.m., heading toward the south side. So that's the south side of the city. Oscar dodged a speeding horse wagon and leaped over a steaming pile of manure. He hopped up onto the wooden sidewalk and wove his way through the crowd, his eyes glued to the yellow cap bobbing in front of him. Turn around, please. The girl didn't look like much of a criminal, with her stick legs and flappy braids. But wasn't that innocent look part of her act? Papa always said the earless was a charmer. "He'll dazzle you with his smile, then shoot you dead," Papa would say. Plus, Papa explained, Earless treated the guys in his gang like brothers. He made sure they ate and drank like kings. Oscar figured the girl was heading for the gang's hideout. His best bet was to secretly follow her there. Oscar stayed hidden as he followed her through the busy streets. They crossed behind a tavern and then cut through a snaking alley. They finally came out onto a dark street of small houses and shacks. The girl beelined for a sagging little house set back from the street. Oscar ducked behind a barrel and waited as she used a key to open the front door. "Bruno," she called out as she went inside. "I'm back." Bruno. Must be one of the thugs, Oscar thought. He saw a piece of jagged wood lying on the ground. He grabbed it. It would make a decent weapon, just in case. He crept up to the house, crouching low so none of the criminals would spot him out the window. He wondered what he should do. Barge in? Demand his suitcases? Suddenly his knees started to shake. Sweat oozed down his neck. What was he doing? He needed to get out of here. But then he thought of Papa facing the gun barrel of earless Max Kildare. No, Oscar thought. He wasn't going to run scared from a bunch of street thugs. He was going to get Papa's badge back. He curled his fingers around his weapon as he rose up, ready for a fight. Oscar peered through the window. He spotted the little thief, and his mouth dropped open in shock. No, he thought, it can't be. He had imagined her sitting there with Otis Weber and the other boys, rummaging through piles of loot. He'd gotten it wrong. There were no thugs, and no signs of his suitcases. The girl sat on a little wooden chair. On her lap was not a pile of stolen money and jewels, but a smiling little boy with a mop of dark curls. Oscar guessed he was maybe 3 years old. Their voices floated through the open window. "Sorry I had to leave you alone again," she said. "I very brave, Jenny," the boy said, puffing out his chest. His little croaking voice made Oscar think of the baby frogs he used to catch behind his house. "Next time I help." "No," the girl said. "It's not fun what I do, and you need to stay here and guard our house." The boy puffed out his chest proudly. "I guard. And guess what? I have enough money to get us some nice fresh milk tomorrow." "And a cookie?" the boy asked hopefully. "We'll see," she said, taking off her yellow cap. She suddenly looked older than Oscar had first thought, maybe 9 or 10. The boy reached up and tenderly smoothed one of the girl's crooked braids. "I love cookies, Jenny," the boy whispered. "I know you do, Bruni," Jenny said. She smiled, but it was a weary kind of smile, tinged with sadness. It reminded Oscar of Mama's smile, how she looked in the months before Mr. Morrow appeared. Oscar swallowed hard as he stepped away from the window. Those kids were on their own. Oscar felt it in his bones. He remembered what the policeman said. Otis Weber preyed on the most helpless orphans. Oscar dropped his stupid weapon and headed slowly toward the road. What a dope he was, pretending he was like Papa, chasing a killer outlaw through Chicago. Instead, he'd found 2 sad little kids. And now all he could think of was Mama. How could he have left her like that? She must be going crazy with worry. His mind was so jumbled up that he barely noticed when something landed on top of his head. It felt like a leaf, or a big moth. He absent-mindedly brushed it away, then was startled when a shower of sparks spilled down in front of his face. A few hit his skin, burning his flesh like red-hot needles. Oscar looked up and saw a sight so strange he was sure his eyes were playing tricks. It looked as if glowing red snowflakes were falling from the sky. They danced in the gusting wind, hundreds of hot burning embers of different sizes and shapes. Before he knew what was happening, they were all around him, attacking like a swarm of fiery bees. They seared his scalp, burned through the wool of his clothes, scorched his lips. Pain lashed him, and the sickening smell of his burning hair made him gag. And suddenly, whoosh! Flames leaped up in front of Oscar's face. The sparks had ignited his clothes. Oscar was on fire. Chapter 6. Oscar threw himself to the ground and rolled in the dirt, frantically beating the flames that were crawling up his arms and reaching out to grab his face. All right, I hope we all know this. If you're ever on fire, what do you do? Cadence?
Like on fire?
Yes, if you are on fire, your clothing that you're wearing, what do you do to put it out? You know?
Either if you're like by sand, you can like put it roll in the sand or something.
Okay. There's an easy little phrase. Zoe?
Stop, drop, and roll.
Stop, drop, and roll. Okay, now I want to make sure you guys know this. I had a firefighter team come to the last school I worked at, and my students didn't really know what this meant, okay? So stop, drop, and roll means if you are on fire, you stop what you're doing, you drop to the ground, like lay flat like you're going to go to sleep, and then you do log rolls. One of my students thought you did somersaults. Nope, log roll, okay? So you want your body to just keep twisting on the ground, and that will put the flames out. So stop, drop, and roll. It's a simple 3 steps so that when you're on fire and panicking, you can remember what to do. And you never know when it might happen. Or if someone you see is on fire, you tell them stop, drop, and roll. I actually did catch on fire when I was a little girl, and I had to stop, drop, and roll. My clothes were on fire. It didn't burn me, but my dress caught on fire. Well, one time it was from a birthday cake. I leaned over and I had a dress on. It caught me on fire. That time my mom put it out. Another time it was sparklers on 4th of July. They caught my clothes on fire, and so I had to stop, drop, and roll.
One time I sang
Shh, I haven't called on anybody. Quentin?
Just last night I was using sparklers.
Okay. Got to be careful anytime you're with fire. Madeline?
My stepdad's pants caught on fire, so we had to take them off. He was just standing in our backyard when it is.
Mm-hmm. All right, Noah, real quick.
It was bomb things that shoot out into the fireworks. My friend did it, and he held it out, and it came backwards and almost hit him.
Yep, you got to be very careful. All right, let's keep reading. All right, he rolled and pounded until finally the burning stopped. He lay there coughing and spitting out the ashes that coated his tongue. His heart hammered with fear, but he couldn't just lie there. The sparks were still everywhere. He had to find somewhere to hide. Gritting his teeth in pain, he managed to crawl back to an old chicken coop behind the kid's house. The wood was mostly rotted away, but the roof was just wide enough to protect Oscar. He sat hugging his knees to his chest, swatting away the sparks that came too close. He breathed deep, trying to slow his hammering heart. He touched his forehead, gently rubbing his fingertips over the blistered skin. His scalp was badly singed, and there were burns up and down his body. But he barely felt the throbbing pain. His attention was focused on the sky. That glow Mama had noticed earlier was brighter now. It looked as though a giant hand had painted the sky bright orange. The fire had gotten bigger, much bigger. That's where the sparks and embers were coming from. The powerful wind was scattering them like burning dandelion seeds. The same thing had happened the night of the forest fire near Castle. Sparks and hunks of burning wood and bark had flown for miles, setting off new fires wherever they landed. Mama and Papa and Oscar had almost lost their barn. Some people lost everything. Barns, houses, even fields. 10 people were killed. One family survived by diving into their pond and dunking under the water while the flames roared over them. Oscar took a breath, trying to loosen the choking fear that gripped his throat. He thought of what Mr. Morrow had said, that Chicago had one of the best fire departments in America. Well, maybe that was true, but there was no sign of them here. And once a fire got too big, not even an army of firefighters could put it out. Oscar had learned that for himself during the Castle fire, how a fire could grow and grow, how it could become like a ferocious beast that would devour everything in its path. And what a fire was most hungry for was wood, like the thousands of shacks and stores that lined Chicago's streets, the miles of wooden sidewalks, the warehouses filled with coal and oil that would explode at the slightest spark. Oscar remembered how the forest looked after the fire. He and Papa had ridden up there to see it for themselves. Oscar would never forget the sight of it. The fire had turned thousands of trees into twisted black stubs. The ground was a sea of ash. There was not a bird, not an insect to be seen. Oscar had tried not to look at the blackened bones that were scattered all around, the skeletons of the creatures that hadn't been able to escape. He and Papa had both loved that forest. They'd go up there with Mama, who loved telling them the names of every last tree and flower. Oscar and Papa had both fought back tears as they stood in the burned ruins. But then Papa had pointed to something on the ground, a tiny green shoot pushing up through the ash. "It will take a long time," Papa had said, "but one day the forest will grow back." Oscar shivered as he thought of what a huge fire like that could do to a city like Chicago. Could such an important city burn to the ground? It didn't seem possible. But hadn't Oscar learned that anything was possible? If a blizzard could kill his Papa, couldn't a fire destroy an entire city? Oscar looked up, as though answers might be printed on the orange sky. But instead, his eyes found the two small and terrified faces peering down at him from the upstairs window of the house. Jenny and Bruno. Noah?
Now we know how his dad died.
Yep, he died in a blizzard. He couldn't get home. The sight of them, lit up by the glowing sky, jolted him. Right at that second, the wind blew its dragon breath. More sparks and embers appeared, and out of nowhere, a large plank of flaming wood came soaring through the air. It was like an enormous flaming spear, hurled by an invisible warrior. It was heading right for the house. Boom! The wood smashed through the roof of the house, sending a column of flames high into the air. Oscar opened his mouth, but he was too horrified to even scream. Chapter 7. We'll start a little bit. Oscar sprinted toward the house, swatting away the burning flakes that swarmed around him. He watched with terror as the fire quickly danced across the roof. Where were the kids? Why hadn't they come bursting through the door? Come on, he whispered, as though he could grab hold of them with his words. But still they did not appear. Oscar rushed up the crumbling steps and pounded on the front door. "Hey," he shouted, "come out." Nothing. He tried the door, but it was locked tight. Where were they? Shouts rang out from the street. "Fire! Fire! Fire!" Oscar whirled around. 2 other houses were burning like torches. The wind gusted and flames leaped across the street. Boom! The house caught fire as if it were made of dried straw. Any minute, this whole street would be a sea of fire. Oscar had to get away. He had to get back to Mama. But how could he leave here if those kids were still in the house? Of course he couldn't. Oscar slammed his shoulder into the door. Bam, bam, bam. On the 3rd try, the door frame splintered and the door burst open. Oscar stumbled in, falling to his knees. Smoke swirled all around him. He rose to his feet, gasping for breath. "Hello," he screamed. "Where are you?" And that's when he heard them. Just above the fire's roar, muffled cries coming from upstairs. Or was it just the wind and the fire fooling his ears? Was it possible the kids had escaped through another door? Oscar stumbled to the narrow staircase, peering up into a churning cloud of black smoke. "Don't be an idiot," he told himself. "Don't go up those stairs." "Hello," Oscar called, praying that nobody would answer, that the kids were long gone. But no. "Help us, please," shouted a terrified voice. The girls. There was no choice. On shaking legs, Oscar started up the stairs. He pulled his shirt up over his mouth and nose. It did nothing to block out the smoke. Each breath burned his throat and lungs. But the worst was the blistering heat. With each step, it grew hotter. Oscar could practically feel his blood boiling, his skin sizzling, his flesh cooking on his bones. He wouldn't last long up here, and neither would Jenny and Bruno. Jenny and Bruno. At the top of the stairs was a closed door. Someone pounded on the other side. "Here," Jenny shouted. "The door is stuck. Please help us." Oscar pushed against the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Stand back," he choked. Oscar kicked the door as hard as he could. The door crashed open, releasing a wave of heat and even thicker smoke that pushed Oscar back on his heels. He teetered and almost fell down the stairs, but somehow he managed to regain his balance. Jenny came rushing out with Bruno in her arms. They were both coughing and wheezing. Their faces were black with soot and streaked with tears. Jenny was clutching Bruno with all her might, but her skinny arms were losing their grip. Oscar reached for Bruno, and to his surprise, the kid didn't resist. Oscar pulled Bruno onto his arms, holding him close to his chest. The poor boy's heart was pounding even harder than Oscar's. Jenny stood unmoving, dazed and coughing. Oscar was afraid she might faint. Oscar grabbed her arm and pointed her down the stairs, gripping her shoulder in case she slipped. He followed right on her heels. "Run straight through the front door," Oscar said to her. "Go as quickly as you can." Jenny did what she was told, gaining strength as they reached the bottom. Oscar put Bruno down at the bottom of the stairs, and Jenny grabbed the little boy's hand. Together they flew out the door. Oscar was just steps behind them, and then, crash! The window shattered. Kaboom! A giant ball of fire and cinders blasted into the room. Oscar fell to the floor. And then there was nothing but flames. And we will stop there today. See you guys tomorrow.